Masterclass of TiEcon Kerala 2023. We have a speaker here, Mr. Bhamidi, a seasoned professional with over 25 years of diverse industry experience, holding degrees from IIT Kharagpur and IIM Ahmedabad. He is the CEO and co-founder of Radarr.com, an AI-powered social listening and customer engagement platform. It's also known as the Bloomberg for marketeers. I invite Mr. Ram to talk about the social media crisis and managing it like a pro. Welcome, sir.
Okay, how many of you have some exposure to marketing, social media, advertising? Just raise your hands. How many of you are students? How many of you know what a social media crisis can look like? All right, great. I have a good, can I have a mic that I can move around with? Yeah, I prefer to move rather than stay. I might come very close to you guys also, stay awake. Hello. Okay, let's get started. So I run a company called Radarr. I'm not going to talk too much about my company. What's important is we talk about the topic today, which is managing a social media crisis like a pro. Does anybody know what that image is? The one on the slide right now? But the reason it was the best was because the photographer claimed that he waited several hours for that aeroplane to appear so he could take that pic. What happened after that? Okay, let's get cracking on this. That's Nikon. They organized an event, a photography contest. They basically said, enchant us with monochrome photography and submit your photo for a chance to walk away with a gift. Right? Nikon D90, shutter speed something, aperture something. This was the entry. Within hours of the award being announced, hours, okay? Not even days or weeks, within hours, people figured out that it was photoshopped. The aeroplane was photoshopped, as you can see. On a larger screen, on a big screen, or on Photoshop with changing the levels slightly, it took minutes for people to figure out that the award-winning entry was photoshopped. Now, what do you think happens to a brand like Nikon when it can't figure out that an award-winning entry is actually photoshopped? What do you think should happen? What happens on social media? Credibility suffers, absolutely. There are 4 billion messages on social media every single day. Any one of them could become a crisis for a brand. Okay, now crisis affects everybody differently. You know, smaller brands are also affected. Bigger brands, of course, are affected much more. Right? Now, let's look at what happened after this. There was a meme fest. You know meme fest, right? Most of you understand what a meme fest is. At the moment this came out, Teletubby. There's the trolley, the winning prize. There's E.T. flying over a building was a really lucky shot. I mean, the original photographer said, I took a lucky shot, hashtag look up, right? And E.T. flying, really lucky shot. Some guy, obviously, you know, everybody's having fun now. Like once it gets to social media, you know, for the brand, it's a crisis. For everybody else, it's fun, right? Changi Airport just said this, hashtag look up, right? Everybody is catching in on that. So when you go through a crisis, it's really bad for you. We'll talk about what you need to do during a crisis, before a crisis, after a crisis. Let's get to the next slide. This is a competitor. Right? Nikon is going through a crisis. Share your best airplane photos with us. Extra points for creative use of photo editing software to put planes in surprising places. Right? What do competitors do? They want to have fun as well, right? They want to get some mileage out of your crisis. right? There, like, all right. There were tens of thousands of news items globally about this, okay? Look up Nikon and this contest. This is one of them, like, but there are many, many, many more. Like, if an ordinary brand would have done that, maybe they would have gotten away, but in this specific case, it was a photography contest. For Nikon, it should have been really easy to figure out that this was Photoshop. You cannot afford to give an award to, #1 award, to a Photoshopped image. Right? There was no plane in the original shot. What happened later was, even the original image was not original. Somebody else found out that it was uploaded by another person a year ago. The one without the aeroplane was actually uploaded. So the guy never actually took any photo. He took one from 1 year ago, another from another place, just put it together and put it out as a composite, as they call it. You know, a euphemism for Photoshopped is composite photo. Okay. Nikon apologized, obviously. You know, you don't have a choice. When you get thrashed on social media, you eventually apologize. The question is, how quickly do you do that, and how do you manage the communication? And we're going to talk about some of that today. Right? They had actually removed the post. The original post they had removed without even telling people. Obviously, people are quite unhappy about that as well. So what is a social media crisis? A social media crisis is a sudden and negative event that impacts your online brand reputation. Those are the three main things, right? It's sudden. You didn't plan for it, it happens. Sometimes it could be caused by what you did as a company or your employees did. Sometimes it's events outside your control. It's a negative event. The crisis is always a negative event. There are ways to find out that a crisis is about to happen. We'll talk about that. And it impacts your brand reputation. Like we'll talk about a few more cases. I would love to find out from you if you are aware of more such use cases. All right, this is open to you. Next 2 minutes. What do you think are the reasons? Here you saw the brand was responsible in a way, right? They just gave away the award to a Photoshop entry. What are the other reasons do you think that can lead to a social media crisis? Anybody? Quality of service, absolutely. You have bad service, it goes to social media. 60% of people today prefer to reach out to brands on social media. The way customer support is being done has changed significantly over the last 5 years. People no longer pick up phones and talk to brands. You know, they'll send you a direct message on Twitter, which is X now, or Facebook, or they'll send you a public message. They'll tag, they'll moan, they'll crib, and they'll try and get influencers to kind of tag onto that. Right? Bad service, anything else? Sorry? Poor quality of your product. Absolutely. I actually have a use case which talks about that right after this. Political situation. Can you give me an example? Israel, Gaza, Hamas having a war. You take sides, and then you get swept in the storm. Right? Absolutely, it can happen. It can also happen Russia, Ukraine. Like depending on who you're siding with, you might be boycotted. All right. I have a few examples here. Okay, I want to see if you can come up with, you can think of any crisis which happened because of any of this. Product or service issues. Product recall. Happens all the time. Right? Automotive, food, happens all the time. PR blunders, you know, you create your own PR blunders. We'll talk about one or two of those blunders here. Data breaches, right? You get hacked, it's a massive PR crisis. It's a global PR crisis. Depending on how big you are, the bigger the crisis it is. Negative customer reviews are there all over the place, right? There are millions of negative customer reviews. There are companies which have made a business out of negative customer reviews, right? Mouth Shut, for example. Glassdoor is essentially negative reviews about the employer. There are some positive, but they make money because there are negative customer reviews, and brands want to address them, right? That's their business model. Offensive social media posts, especially if they come from the brand. There was I have an example towards the end of an Indian brand. We'll talk about it at that point of time. It could be religiously offensive, it could be racially offensive, it could be offensive in other ways. Employee misconduct could become a crisis. And there's, of course, fake news and misinformation all the time. It's really difficult to figure out which news is legit, which is fake. There are deep fake videos now of Narendra Modi doing Garba with a bunch of women, for example, right? It's very difficult. This age is really difficult. There are new tools coming up to make deep fake. And on the other side, there are new tools coming to figure out whether something is deep fake, right? People are trying to make money both ways. Okay. If you have to figure out whether a crisis is going to happen or not, okay, these are the 4 main ways to figure that out. There are tools which can help you predict whether something is going to become viral or not. Okay, on our platform, we look at this data and some more to say crisis is going to happen in 6 hours from now, right? And that's a lot of time for brand managers and PR managers to prepare for it. But let's look at the basics. Your negative mentions are going up. Okay. For a large brand, some of our clients have over 10 million brand mentions a month, right? For a smaller brand, it's easier to go and figure out. You can actually go and run a search on X, on Facebook, on news to figure out if there are negative mentions about your smaller brand. But for a large brand, it's almost impossible to do this manually. But negative mentions go up. Hashtags, some hashtags start trending. Boycott somebody. Right? Somebody sucks. Those are the typical kind of hashtags that are used when you're going through a crisis. So if you see your brand being associated with any of those, that means a crisis is probably going to happen. Influential voices speaking out. These could be celebs of any kind, politics, film, other places. If you're a celeb, if you have 1 million followers, you have 10 million followers, and you actually get into something, it becomes a crisis. A decline in brand sentiment. Okay, 1 and 4 are kind of correlated. There are tools to do all of this. We'll not talk about the tool here. There are tools to do all of this. What is important is that you can look at these 4 as indicators of whether or not a crisis is going to happen. So what happens? What happened to Nikon? And then I have a use case right after this where I kind of exaggerate it to the very other end. What happened to Nikon, do you think? What could they have done differently? They could have checked the image. I think a basic due diligence is in order when you are running a photography contest and you are known for photography. Okay, damage to brand reputation. A lot of companies have goodwill on their balance sheet, right? Which could run into hundreds of billions of dollars for large brands. Apple has it for more than $1 trillion of goodwill, right? It's the value of your brand, and that gets affected to differing levels, and it takes a lot of time for you to get back on track when it comes to your reputation. Loss of customers, right? There are comments which say, Nikon sucks, I'm going to Canon, right? And it happens also. People associate with brands not just at a utility level, which is, there's some value in using a Nikon camera, but I connect with the brand. I buy Nike because I connect with Nike, and I don't connect with Adidas, for example, right? So people have those ethos and sentiments, and they use that to make their purchasing decision. Stock price goes down. I have a case right after this. The stock price tumbled. It was a big crisis. We'll talk about that. For public companies, it's a big deal. And there could be legal repercussions of a social media crisis. All right. Any guesses on what this crisis is? Sorry, what? Shipment? No. Dieselgate, absolutely. Who said that? Awesome. Okay. Right. Love those cars? They're from the same company. Audi is from Volkswagen Group. There's the Audi A3, and there are two other, all three were involved in this scandal. What was the scandal? Volkswagen put in defeat devices in their cars. What is a defeat device? A defeat device is a device which can find out if pollution levels are being tested and not release the same level of pollutants. If the car is stationary and somebody fits a device to the exhaust, right? This is how you do your test, right? You get your 6-month pollution test, right? If the car is stationary and the test is being done, you know somebody is testing it. So you can withhold the pollutants and release it later when the car is in motion, right? It's a defeat device. You are deliberately trying to look good in pollution tests, right? 11 million cars in Europe and US were fitted with these devices. Right? Governments in US and Europe are very stringent in terms of pollution norms. The company was struggling to have those higher level of standards being met. There was pressure to obviously do sales. What do? The company actually did this, right? This is your problem. You created this problem, and the world is obviously going to react to that. Like that was the end result of what happened. It started with a university in US, which was doing some random tests. They figured that there was a massive disconnect between what the company was reporting in terms of their emission norms versus what they actually found, right? They had ways to test cars while they were in motion, and they found that there was a significant difference in the pollution level when the car was in motion in a lab environment versus when it was stationary, right? That's what started. They published a report. The government took cognizance of that report. They actually tested it further. This started in US. It obviously affected Europe as well. It was a massive, massive, massive crisis for the brand. Audi was our client when they were going through this crisis, right? What do you do when you suddenly get hit by this crisis? Audi in Singapore was our client, not in US or Europe, but obviously people talk. The world's a small place. It's a connected place. Okay, any learnings or thoughts from that before we move on to the next one? That was the end result. Obviously, he had no choice. The other option would have been to have him fired. He has to take responsibility. The public notice that went out basically said that he was not aware of what had happened, but he takes moral responsibility as a CEO, and therefore he's stepping down. Right? Stuff like this doesn't happen without the CEO's knowledge. Usually does not happen without the CEO's knowledge. There could be like a bad employee doing something, but in general, you're aware of what's happening, especially when 11 million of your cars have been fitted with those defeat devices. All right, in the interest of time, let's just move forward. What do you need to do? How do you handle this like a pro, right? You don't want to be an amateur when your brand is being hit by a crisis. Number one is you need to know who will be part of your crisis communication team, right? This is very important. There are stakeholders from various departments who need to be part of this. If you're a smaller company, then maybe it's just 1 or 2 founders. If it's a larger company, there could be several people from several different teams and departments. Communication channels, right? Not every brand is discussed on every platform. There are some platforms where discussions happen more for certain kinds of brands. On Twitter, for example, which is X, there are different kinds of discussions. On Facebook, on Instagram, there are new things that are coming up as well, right? And then there are blogs and forums where people are discussing. There are news articles that are being discussed. In our case, what we saw was, in the Audi case, what we saw was the social media mentions were not that high. news outlets were going crazy about this news. You know, it was a big deal for them. They made a really big deal out of the Dieselgate crisis, right? People didn't care as much. They really didn't care as much. We could see correlations between news and social channels, and that was very evident. Now, you need to be able to get that kind of data to figure out how you want to respond to that and how do you want to address that. So which communication channels, what should be the message in case there is a crisis? Pre-approved responses if required, so that people can act really fast. Monitoring and reporting, you need to have a war room in place where you can respond to this really fast. And testing and updating your plan. Okay, I'll not go through this. This is just for you to take a pick and we move on. There are different teams that potentially might be involved. You just need to understand for your brand, what is it that is important? What kind of people need to be part of your crisis management team? Sorry, I'll just go back for 5 seconds. All right, responding to a crisis. It's quite clear, but we'll quickly review those points. When a crisis happens, you must respond quickly. I put up image of a building on fire to show that a social media crisis is basically like that, right? You only have limited time before the building will completely collapse, right? You want to save that building. That is your brand. You have to respond quickly, and you have to be as transparent as possible. Responding quickly means the ability to wake up your CEO or the board at 3 in the night, right? That is your team. You have to plan for a crisis. You guys understand disaster recovery, right? If you're from IT data background, right, is the equivalent for a brand, right? When there's a disaster, you must have a plan to recover from the disaster. You must have a plan to recover from a crisis, a social media crisis. Assess the situation, gather information. There are tools available which will tell you what's happening, and you need to get all of that data as soon as possible. If you have an agency, PR agency, get them involved. Figure out what is happening as soon as possible. Have a very clear and concise message. Social media doesn't like BS. When you're going through a crisis, the last thing they want is long, convoluted, confused, muddled up messages that are trying to, whatever. You just try to use Shashi Tharoor kind of language when you're going through a crisis, you will get bashed up completely, right? That language is great for peacetime. But when you're going through a crisis, people expect you to be really transparent, concise, and precise. Choose the right communication channels. You do not have to be on every single channel. You would not have the time to be on 20 different social platforms. You need to figure out where you can create the maximum amount of impact. Is it Twitter which is causing the biggest amount of problem? Be there, right? Is it some other place which is causing the biggest problem? Be there. Are those news outlets which are causing the problem? Get in touch with those journalists and figure out what your messaging should be. What is your official stand? They want to know. When you go through a crisis, the journalists want to know what your official position on that is. And you need to get that out as soon as possible. Continue to monitor the situation. Crisis could go on for a few hours, few days, several weeks, several months as well. Depends on what kind of crisis it is and how badly it's affecting you. Empathy cannot emphasize the importance of empathy. Empathy is really, really important, right? A customer going through a bad experience, for example, poor service, for example, or a defective product, for example, you need to empathize with them, right? That's important. People who are responding on social media need to be trained to empathize with customers. And that's very, very important when you're going through a crisis as well. Okay, sometimes you don't have a definitive response right away. So you communicate an initial response, and then you have a way to communicate updates on a regular basis. Okay, what's better than going through a crisis? planning for one. Right? It's very important that you plan for crisis. Crisis will happen. Most brands will go through crisis. There's at least one crisis that happens every single day. Every single day, there's a brand that's going through a crisis. It's important you prepare for a crisis. We'll talk about these 4 steps. Okay. First, figure out what is a trigger for crisis for your brand. Different brands have different kinds of crisis triggers. Find out what it is for you, for your brand. This could be your company if you're an entrepreneur. This could be your employer. Figure out which brand has what kind of triggers. Assemble your crisis team. You had the full list over there. Figure out who needs to be on your crisis team. If you did have a crisis, who should be on your team that can make a quick decision on what should be done. Have communication guidelines. Like I said in the previous slide, what channels do we want to communicate on? What kind of messaging? How do we empathize with people? Have that plan in place. Monitor social media actively. There are 4 billion social media messages every single day, right? You have to monitor them on an ongoing basis, but when you're going through a crisis, it's even more important that you're monitoring this on a real-time basis. Conduct crisis simulations similar to your disaster recovery every 6 months, every 12 months. Actually have a mock crisis, like a fire drill. Right? Just make sure that your team can respond and react to a crisis, and then see what your learnings are, and then improve your plan based on that. During a crisis, a lot of brands today have automated way of posting on social media. They post regular things on an automated way. The first thing you need to do is stop all scheduled posts. Right? You don't know what is going to hit them. So if you think there's a crisis, stop your scheduled posts right away. Every single post has to be manually approved, reviewed, and approved before it hits the social media. Acknowledge the issue publicly. There's a crisis, acknowledge it. You may not have a solution right away. You may not even be able to verify if you caused it, but it's important that you acknowledge it, right? And then say, we are looking into this. We will come back and provide another update. Right? You need to be as transparent as possible. If it clearly looks like you've done wrong, apologize in advance. There's no harm in apologizing in advance. It can soothe things out. Keep providing regular updates. Communication is the key. Whenever there is a problem, doesn't matter whether it is social media, whether it's 2 humans. Most crises break down and become worse because there is no more communication. Right? Yesterday I was reading a news article about an IAS officer and an IPS officer. Have you guys seen that? Right? The IPS officer was accusing the IAS officer of a lot of things, and it went to court. And the court said, you guys can't even sort out your own differences, and you're coming to me. How are you going to do administration? The point is, communication breaks down when you're not aligned. When 2 people are not aligned, when the customer and the brand are not aligned, you have to make sure that the communication will not break down, right? You have to keep providing communication updates. People will trash you. There'll be a lot of negative stuff, okay? You have to be as neutral as possible at that point of time. Engage with commenters. People who are commenting, do not ignore them, right? Especially, there are ways to find out who is more influential, whose sentiment is more negative. Monitor that data. Figure out who are the influencers that you need to engage with. Figure out who have the most negative sentiment that you need to engage with. And there are tools to do all of that. Monitor the sentiment over a period of time, see if it's getting better, and see what you need to do further to respond to that. After the crisis is over, you have to see what you learned from that crisis. And you don't necessarily end the crisis within hours or days. There are crises. The Volkswagen crisis went on for months, for example, right? See what did not work. Have a debrief with the team. Figure out what needs to be changed and improve on that. Document your key learnings and see how the plan needs to be improved. And this is from my experience. Okay, this is not part of the plan, but additional tips just from my experience. I've been on social media for 20 years now. First as a user. Some of you may have known about Orkut. The first proper social media which is still existing, and I created my account, was LinkedIn in 2004. It was very new. Facebook in 2006-7, and so on and so forth, right? I've done a lot of things on social media. Crisis is one of the things that we're talking about. You know, that's the focus of this workshop. There's a lot of other things that can be done on social media, but we'll stick with crisis for today's workshop. Transparency and authenticity is really, really important. Okay, you have to be transparent on social media. People will call out your BS right away, right? You cannot just say something and get away with it. And this is like a cyclone, right? I mean, 100,000 people talking about you in a negative way will hit you really bad. It doesn't not matter, right? You can stand on the beach waiting for a tsunami to come. You can disagree with what the tsunami is trying to do, but the tsunami will hit you anyway. You will be flown away, right? That's not the time for you to decide whether you agree or disagree with what people are saying, right? You have to be as authentic, as transparent as possible, and deal with it, right? There will be a lot of negativity when there's a crisis. You just have to deal with it. Use clear and concise language. Focus on, I just smiled because I thought of Shashi Tharoor. I admire him a lot, but that is not the language to use when you're going through a crisis, right? You need to be able to connect with the ordinary people, and there's a lot of them on social media, and make sure that your message is getting across and not getting muddled in a lot of complicated words. Show empathy and understanding. Maintain a professional tone. People will use all sorts of language. They will tag you. They will use a lot of words which, as humans, we feel bad when somebody uses bad words, right? It'll happen, right? And you have to learn to be as professional as possible. The last one is really from my experience. Just read that once, if you can. Build friends during peacetime. When you do not have a crisis going on, build a community of people who will support you when you actually have a crisis. You will see those people, they'll actually stand up for you when there's a crisis going on. You know, in the middle of a crisis, you'll see that some people are saying a lot of negative things, but there will be some people who'll come and say, I've always had a great experience with this brand. This is a small mistake, let's move on, right? You need those advocates. And the only way to do this is to build it during your peace time, not during your crisis time. Anybody remembers this? We only have 2 slides left. This became a crisis. I mean, on the face of it, you don't know why this should become a crisis. But does anybody know what this crisis was? This happened just before Diwali. As we welcome the festival of love and light, Jasn-e-Riwaz by Fab India is a collection that beautifully pays homage to Indian culture. Right? On the face of it, it looks fine. You know what became a crisis? There are people who will make a crisis out of anything. A mountain out of a molehill. Jasn-e-Riwaz was the problem. They said, how can you associate Diwali with Jasn-e-Riwaz? Which literally translated means celebration of tradition, right? But the fact that it was an Urdu term or phrase was what created the crisis, right? One of the first people who responded to this was an MP from South Bangalore, Tejasvi Surya. He basically said, how can you use Jasn-e-Riwaz for a tradition like Diwali? There's no connection there, number one. Number two, companies like Fab India should be economically punished for creating these kind of controversies. You see that? Sometimes it's not ordinary people. Sometimes it's influencers. And remember that people may have an agenda when they are responding to your brand. Okay? it's not for you to disagree with them or their agenda. You have to find a way to still respond to it. Because when an MP with 10 million followers on Twitter bashes a brand, a lot of people get onto that bandwagon. Right? So they apologized. Right? I think apology is the bare minimum that people expect from a brand when there's a crisis. And the apology was, that was not our intent. Right? And next one, this is the last, really. Do you remember? Maggi noodles? Sorry, I was lying. There's one more after this. There's one more slide after this. But Maggi noodles basically was a $500 million PR crisis. 37,000 tons of Maggi was burnt because they did not meet the necessary norms. And I don't know what was happening before that, but after that, they definitely strengthened their quality checks. And their global CEO of Nestle was in India to sort things out. Right? They obviously took it seriously after a while. In the first few weeks, they kept denying it. They kept saying, we didn't do it, we meet all quality standards. But eventually, they burned everything that was affected. They strengthened their quality norms. Since then, this was a few years ago. So since then, they've worked on their brand again, and they've got it back. A lot of people are using Maggi. Everybody's forgotten about this crisis. So yeah, I mean, it looks like it's a really, really bad thing while you're going through it, but you can get out of it. All right, I think this is the last. I flew Indigo yesterday, and I'm going to fly Indigo tonight again. Okay. This video went viral. It went absolutely viral. There was a guy called Rajiv Katyal who was manhandled, pushed down to the ground, and physically restrained by Indigo staff because he was being abusive. The reason he was being abusive was because the flight was significantly delayed, it was hot, and they were asked to stand outside and not allowed to board the flight. Right? There's a reason. Everybody has a reason for doing what they're doing. That's the official message. The video did cause a lot of harm to the brand at that point of time. They did respond to it really fast. By stern action, I suppose those staff were fired, and they put some more processes in place to be more empathetic towards their customers. All right, any questions or thoughts or comments?
Recently there was data leakage from Indian hotels. Yeah. So what happened?
Data leakages are becoming more common than we may like to believe. It's happening all the time, right? So typically there are financial penalties. People don't seem to care so much. I mean, as individuals, especially in India, we don't really care so much about our data, right? If this was Europe, there will be very, very strong GDPR-related laws. There will be hundreds of billions of dollars worth of penalty if there was a data breach like that, right? But yeah, people move on. People forget about it. People move on. The brand sends a message saying, change your passwords, and everybody forgets about it in a few days.
We, in our firm, we are providing services to biotech related services.
Yeah.
So in our Google review, some of them wrote a review like we got a false result or false data we received. The service is very bad. While I checked that review, a particular customer, that particular person name was not in our client list. Yeah. So they used their fake name, or some of the other competitors utilize that.
He's basically saying there are reviews which look fake, right? Because that customer doesn't even exist. It happens all the time. There are people who want bad things to happen to you. These could be disgruntled employees because they were fired. These could be competitors who are worried that you're doing too well. You can reach out to Google. Google has an official policy to review and remove fake posts and messages. Right? A lot of our clients today, so in the Radarr platform, for example, Google reviews, App Store, Play Store, all the big social platforms and other things are unified. And the best way to deal with these kind of things where you think it's a fake, we have some kind of a spam and bot detection. It's not 100% effective, but there are ways to find out that it could potentially be a fake review, okay? If it has no followers, if that name does not even exist on any of the social platforms. So you do 5 or 10 minutes of work, you figure out that it looks like a fake review. Take it up with the brand. In most cases, Google will actually remove that fake review. Sometimes these are genuinely disgruntled, and that's, I think, okay. That's how the ex-employee feels at that point. But some of them are actually from competitors. They just want, especially in the tech industry where it's fiercely competitive to get the best talent, and people do check reviews before joining. It's possible. There are cases where just a legal notice sent to Glassdoor has made sure that they've removed the review. So there's recourse that you have. It'll take time, but if it's really important, you should do it. Okay, our scheduled time, 10:45, is over, so we will wrap up this session. Hope you found this useful. Feel free to connect with me offline, outside the session, on LinkedIn, wherever. I am on social 24/7. I need to be. Thank you for attending this session.